My name is Jessica, and for 3 years I endured the worst boss imaginable. Catherine Morrison was a corporate psychopath who made my life a living hell every single day. She thought she was untouchable, protected by her position and connections. She was wrong. When she finally pushed me too far, I destroyed her career, her reputation, and her freedom in ways she never saw coming. I started working at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions right after college, eager to begin my career in digital marketing. The company had an excellent reputation, and I was thrilled to land a position on their social media team. During my interview process, everyone seemed professional and welcoming. I thought I had found the perfect place to grow my career. Catherine Morrison was the director of digital marketing, and technically my boss's boss. She was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, and had built a reputation as one of the most successful marketing executives in the city. On paper, she looked like someone I could learn from and admire. In reality, she was a monster. My first interaction with Catherine should have been a warning sign. During my second week on the job, she called me into her office ostensibly to welcome me to the team. Instead, she spent 20 minutes critiquing everything from my outfit to my educational background to my previous internship experience. "I want you to understand something," she said, leaning back in her expensive leather chair. "This is not college anymore. This is the real world, and in the real world, mediocrity gets you nowhere. I have very high standards, and if you cannot meet them, you will not last long here." I nodded and tried to appear professional, thinking this was just her way of setting expectations. I had no idea that this was actually the beginning of a systematic campaign of harassment and abuse that would continue for the next 3 years. Catherine's preferred method of management was public humiliation. She would call team meetings where she would single out individual employees for criticism, often for mistakes that were either minor or not even their fault. She had a talent for finding exactly the right words to make people feel small and worthless. Her favorite target was me. I never understood why Catherine had chosen me as her primary victim. Perhaps it was because I was young and she saw me as an easy target. Perhaps it was because I was competent enough to be seen as a threat but not senior enough to fight back effectively. Or perhaps she was just a sadist who enjoyed making people suffer. Whatever her motivation, Catherine made my work life a nightmare from day one. She would assign me impossible deadlines and then berate me publicly when I could not meet them. She would change project requirements at the last minute and then act like the confusion was my fault. She would take credit for my successful campaigns and blame me for anything that went wrong. The psychological warfare was constant and exhausting. Catherine had a way of making me question my own competence and sanity. She would give me verbal instructions and then deny ever having said them. She would promise me resources for projects and then claim she had never made such promises. She would praise my work privately and then criticize it harshly in front of others. One of her favorite tactics was to schedule important meetings at times when she knew I had conflicts, and then use my absence as evidence that I was not committed to my job. She would send me urgent emails late at night, and then criticize me the next morning for not responding immediately. She would volunteer me for additional projects without consulting me, and then express disappointment when the extra workload affected my performance on my regular duties. The worst part was how she managed to make her abuse look professional to outside observers. Catherine was skilled at couching her cruelty in business language and presenting her harassment as legitimate management feedback. To anyone who was not paying close attention, she appeared to be a demanding but fair boss who was simply trying to maintain high standards. But those of us who worked directly under Catherine knew the truth. She was a bully and a tyrant who used her position of power to satisfy her sadistic impulses. Several talented employees had quit because of her behavior, but the company's leadership either did not know or did not care about what was happening in her department. I should have quit too, but I was young and naive and convinced that if I just worked harder, I could earn her respect and make the situation better. I also needed the job and the experience, and I was afraid that leaving so early in my career would make me look unreliable to future employers. So I endured 3 years of daily abuse, watching my confidence and mental health deteriorate under the constant assault on my self-worth. I developed anxiety and insomnia from the stress. I lost weight because I was too nervous to eat properly. I isolated myself from friends and family, because I was ashamed of how my boss was treating me and convinced that it must somehow be my fault. Catherine seemed to feed off my misery. The more upset and rattled I became, the more aggressive her attacks grew. She would smile when she saw me flinch at her criticism. She would laugh when she caught me trying not to cry after a particularly brutal dressing down. She was clearly enjoying every moment of my suffering. The breaking point came during the company's annual client appreciation event. Catherine had assigned me to coordinate the social media coverage for the event, which involved managing multiple platforms, coordinating with photographers, and ensuring that all content met the company's brand standards. It was a high-pressure assignment, but I was determined to execute it flawlessly. I had spent weeks preparing for the event, creating content calendars, coordinating with vendors, and developing contingency plans for any potential issues. Everything was going smoothly until Catherine decided to make some last-minute changes that completely disrupted my carefully planned strategy. 20 minutes before the event started, Catherine informed me that she had invited several additional VIP clients who needed to be featured prominently in our social media coverage. She had not mentioned these clients before, and I had no background information about them or their preferences. She also decided that the content strategy one had developed was too generic and needed to be completely revised on the spot. I tried to explain that making such significant changes at the last minute would compromise the quality of our coverage, but Catherine cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Do not make excuses," she said coldly. "A competent marketing professional should be able to adapt to changing circumstances. If you cannot handle this level of responsibility, perhaps you are not cut out for this industry." I spent the entire event scrambling to implement her last-minute changes while simultaneously trying to execute my original plan. The result was predictably chaotic. Some content was posted late, some clients were not featured as prominently as they expected, and the overall social media coverage lacked the cohesion and polish that I had originally planned. The next morning, Catherine called an emergency team meeting to discuss the social media disaster from the previous evening. In front of the entire marketing department, she spent 30 minutes detailing every mistake and oversight from the event coverage, making it clear that I was solely responsible for the problems. "This is exactly the kind of unprofessional performance that reflects poorly on our entire department," she announced to the room. "Jessica's inability to manage a basic social media campaign has embarrassed our company in front of our most important clients. This level of incompetence is simply unacceptable." She went on to suggest that perhaps I was not qualified for my position, and that the company needed to seriously consider whether I was the right fit for their team. She made it clear that my job was in jeopardy, and that I would need to demonstrate significant improvement immediately or face termination. I sat there listening to her publicly destroy my reputation and question my competence, knowing that she was the one who had sabotaged the project with her last-minute changes. I felt humiliated, angry, and completely powerless to defend myself. Several of my colleagues looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up in my defense. That was the moment I decided that Catherine Morrison needed to be destroyed. I had spent 3 years being her victim, accepting her abuse, and hoping that the situation would somehow improve. I had convinced myself that her behavior was just part of the corporate world, and that I needed to learn to deal with difficult bosses. But watching her publicly humiliate me while taking no responsibility for her own role in the disaster made me realize that she was never going to change, and that passive acceptance was not going to protect me. I decided to fight back, and I was going to make sure that when I did, Catherine Morrison would regret ever crossing me. The first step in my revenge plan was to start documenting everything. I began keeping detailed records of every interaction with Catherine, including dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes whenever possible. I started recording our conversations on my phone, which was legal in our state as long as one party consented to the recording. I also began researching Catherine's background and professional history more thoroughly. I had always assumed that her success was legitimate, but as I dug deeper, I began to find inconsistencies and red flags that suggested there might be more to her story than appeared on the surface. What I discovered shocked me. Catherine's impressive resume was largely fabricated. The MBA from a prestigious business school that she claimed to have earned had never been completed. The award-winning campaigns that she took credit for had actually been developed by other team members who had since left the company. The professional associations and certifications she listed on her LinkedIn profile were either exaggerated or completely fictional. But the most damaging discovery was evidence that Catherine had been systematically embezzling money from the company for years. Through careful analysis of departmental budgets and expense reports, I discovered that Catherine had been inflating vendor costs and pocketing the difference. She had created fake consulting agreements with shell companies that existed only on paper. She had been billing personal expenses to client accounts and manipulating project budgets to hide the discrepancies. The scope of her fraud was staggering. Over the course of 5 years, Catherine had stolen more than $200,000 from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. She had been careful to spread the theft across multiple accounts and projects, making it difficult to detect without a comprehensive audit. I spent weeks gathering evidence and building an airtight case against Catherine. I collected financial records, email communications, and vendor invoices that clearly demonstrated the pattern of fraud. I also documented her history of harassment and abuse, including the recordings I had made of our conversations and testimony from other employees who had been victimized by her behavior. When I was confident that my evidence was comprehensive and bulletproof, I prepared for the final phase of my revenge plan. I decided to expose Catherine during the company's quarterly board meeting, where she would be presenting the department's performance metrics to the executive leadership team. It was the perfect setting because all of the key decision-makers would be present, and Catherine would have no opportunity to spin the story or deflect blame onto others. The night before the board meeting, I prepared a detailed presentation that laid out all of my evidence against Catherine. I included financial documents showing her embezzlement, recordings of her abusive behavior, and documentation proving that her professional credentials were fraudulent. I also prepared copies of all supporting materials for each member of the board. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office early and placed a copy of my presentation on each board member's chair before they arrived. I also sent electronic copies to the CEO, the CFO, and the head of human resources, with a note explaining that I would be presenting this information during the meeting. Catherine walked into the conference room at exactly 9 o'clock, looking confident and composed as always. She had no idea that her world was about to collapse around her. The CEO opened the meeting by asking Catherine to present her department's quarterly results. She launched into her usual polished presentation, highlighting successful campaigns and impressive performance metrics. She was in her element, commanding the room with her confident demeanor and professional expertise. When she finished her presentation, the CEO thanked her and asked if there were any questions or additional items to discuss. That was my cue. I stood up and asked if I could address the board about some serious concerns regarding departmental management and financial irregularities. The CEO looked surprised but nodded for me to proceed. I walked to the front of the room and began presenting my evidence against Catherine. I started with the financial fraud, showing the board exactly how she had been stealing money from the company through fake vendor agreements and inflated expenses. I presented bank records, invoices, and email communications that clearly demonstrated her guilt. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Catherine's crimes became clear. Board members were flipping through the documentation I had provided, their faces growing more serious with each page they reviewed. Catherine's confident demeanor evaporated as she realized what was happening. She tried to interrupt my presentation several times, claiming that I was making false accusations and that she could explain any apparent irregularities. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I then moved on to Catherine's fabricated credentials, showing the board that her MBA was never completed and that many of her claimed professional achievements were fictional. I demonstrated how she had been taking credit for other employees' work while systematically undermining and abusing the people who actually generated the results she claimed as her own. Finally, I played several recordings of Catherine's abusive behavior, including her public humiliation of me and other employees. The board members listened in shocked silence as they heard their director of digital marketing revealing herself to be a cruel and unprofessional bully who had created a toxic work environment. When I finished my presentation, the conference room was dead silent. Catherine looked like she was going to be sick. Several board members were shaking their heads in disgust and disbelief. The CEO was the first to speak. "Catherine, do you have any response to these allegations?" Catherine tried to mount a defense, claiming that I was a disgruntled employee who was making false accusations because of performance issues. But her explanations were weak and unconvincing, especially in light of the overwhelming evidence I had presented. The CFO interrupted her rambling defense to ask specific questions about the financial irregularities. When Catherine could not provide satisfactory explanations for the discrepancies, it became clear to everyone in the room that she was guilty of embezzlement. The meeting was adjourned immediately, and Catherine was escorted from the building by security, while the board discussed how to handle the situation. I was asked to remain available to provide additional information and to cooperate with the investigation that would inevitably follow. Within 24 hours, Catherine Morrison's career was over. She was terminated immediately and banned from the company premises. The board voted unanimously to pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Her professional reputation was destroyed as word of her crimes spread throughout the industry. The criminal investigation moved quickly because of the comprehensive evidence I had provided. Catherine was arrested within a week and charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, and falsification of business records. The prosecutor praised the thoroughness of my documentation, saying it made their job significantly easier. Catherine tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence against her was so overwhelming that she had very little leverage. She ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, along with an order to pay full restitution to the company. The civil consequences were equally devastating. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions sued Catherine for the money she had stolen, plus additional damages for the harm she had caused to the company's reputation and operations. They were awarded a judgment for over $500,000, which effectively bankrupted her. Catherine's professional credentials were revoked, and she was blacklisted from the marketing industry. Her personal reputation was destroyed as news of her crimes and abusive behavior spread through professional networks and social media. She lost her expensive apartment, her luxury car, and most of her personal possessions to pay legal fees and restitution. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching Catherine's arrogant confidence crumble, as she realized the full extent of what I had done to her. The woman who had spent years making me feel powerless and worthless had been completely destroyed by the victim she had underestimated. The impact on my own life was overwhelmingly positive. The company promoted me to Catherine's former position, along with a significant salary increase and public recognition for my courage in exposing the fraud. My colleagues, who had previously been afraid to support me openly, now praised my strength and professionalism in handling such a difficult situation. My mental health improved dramatically once Catherine was gone. The anxiety and insomnia that had plagued me for years disappeared almost immediately. I regained my confidence and enthusiasm for my work, and I began to remember why I had chosen marketing as my career in the first place. The company also implemented new policies and procedures to prevent future abuse and fraud. They established anonymous reporting systems for harassment complaints and more rigorous oversight of departmental finances. My experience had not only removed a toxic manager, but had also made the workplace safer for everyone. 6 months after Catherine's arrest, I received a letter from her attorney asking if I would be willing to provide a character reference for her sentencing hearing. The letter suggested that Catherine had learned from her mistakes and was genuinely remorseful for her actions. I wrote back with a single sentence: "Catherine Morrison showed me no mercy for 3 years, and she deserves none in return." She received the maximum sentence allowed under the law. Looking back on the experience now, I am proud of how I handled Catherine's abuse and eventual downfall. I could have continued to accept her harassment and hoped that someone else would eventually stop her. I could have quit my job and let her continue victimizing other employees. Instead, I chose to fight back strategically and decisively. My revenge was not impulsive or emotional. It was carefully planned and meticulously executed. I gathered overwhelming evidence, chose the perfect moment to strike, and delivered a blow that Catherine could never recover from. I did not just get her fired. I destroyed her career, her freedom, and her future. Some people might argue that my revenge was too harsh, that I should have simply reported her behavior to HR and let the company handle the situation internally. But Catherine's abuse had been going on for years without any intervention from the company's leadership. She was protected by her position and her ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. The only way to stop someone like Catherine Morrison was to expose her so completely and devastatingly that she could never hurt anyone again. That is exactly what I accomplished. My story serves as a warning to workplace bullies and fraudsters everywhere. You may think you are protected by your position or your ability to manipulate others, but if you choose the wrong victim, you may find yourself facing consequences that will destroy everything you have worked to build. Catherine Morrison learned this lesson the hard way. She thought I was weak and helpless, just another victim who would quietly endure her abuse without fighting back. She never imagined that I had the intelligence, patience, and determination to destroy her completely. She spent 3 years making my life miserable, and I spent one morning ending her career forever. That seems like a fair trade to me. The woman who once told me that mediocrity gets you nowhere in the real world learned that cruelty and fraud get you even less. She traded her freedom, her career, and her reputation for the temporary satisfaction of bullying someone she thought could not fight back. She was wrong about me, and she paid the ultimate price for that mistake. Justice was served, karma came full circle, and the workplace bully got exactly what she deserved. Sometimes the victim becomes the victor, and sometimes the victory is so complete that the perpetrator never recovers. This was one of those times. If this story of workplace justice and ultimate revenge gave you chills, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Janet for more incredible tales of toxic bosses getting destroyed and workplace bullies meeting their match. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you never miss our latest revenge stories. Drop a comment below if you have your own toxic boss horror stories. We love hearing from our community of justice seekers. Remember, at Revenge Janet, we believe that every workplace bully deserves to face the consequences of their actions, and every victim has the power to fight back and win. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is professional destruction.